First of all, a heads up, in about a minute's time, I'm going to be asking you to write something down. So please grab a pen and paper or a digital equivalent in anticipation of that. Thanks very much, Michael, for the invitation to speak with you today. My first visit to Hong Kong was in 1997. It was the first time I'd left Europe, and I was thoroughly enchanted by my visit to Hong Kong. So it's a great pleasure to be with you today. I'm going to start sharing my screen. Go. And legal academics have engaged with design thinking in three main ways so far. So they've gone outside the law school and worked sometimes with the students or outside agencies on legal problems in the legal system or in society, often on access to justice issues. Secondly, they've taught legal design thinking concepts and tools to the law students. Thirdly, they've researched the philosophy and the practice and the implications of legal design. Now, this seminar is a bit different. It's not any of those three things. It proposes that an awareness of design thinking and a judicious use of service design methods has the potential to help really any legal education project, whether that's curriculum design or classroom approaches or skills development or assessment, on any program or any topic. So that could be in Welcome Week or induction, across the first year of a law degree, or in teaching contract law, criminal law, land law, etc. And I use the word potential and help because this is not one of those talks that says that the X is the single answer to all of your needs. The X will solve all of your problems. Design thinking won't. But my argument is that design thinking can be a useful perspective, like a new set of glasses, or that can add to the palette of techniques that you have to do your job as an educator. And that's quite ambitious enough. So pen and paper at hand, just for about a minute, I want you to think about and write down some educational challenge or problem or aspiration that you face within your teaching or within your learning. So it could be big or small, intermediate or midterm. So I'm going to give you a minute to think about that. And I'll shut up to give you time to think and play you a nice bit of background music. Okay, well, that's around about a minute. Hopefully you've got something down in front of you. I thought I'd do a really quick whistle-stop tour of what legal design is to give you a bit of context. So I'll go through this as quickly as I can, and then we'll take a bit more time on the educational stuff. What is legal design? We have big debates on this in the legal design movement. We don't have to worry about those now. It's based on design thinking and the application of service design methods and service design mindsets to legal processes or legal documents or indeed legal systems. What's design thinking? Well, in the olden days, designers went to art design school like the Bauhaus, and they became graphic designers who designed posters or advertisements, or industrial designers like Arne Jacobsen here, designed hotel interiors, or knives and forks or kettles. But then people started to think, we can take the mindsets and the techniques and the tools that designers use to address problems and apply them to a much wider range of services and systems and experience. And a big part of that happened in Silicon Valley through the IDEO design agency and through the Stanford University Design School. And the tech giants integrated a lot of these design methods into the development of new services and new products. And sometimes this is called service design or user-centered design or design thinking. But the key point is that design became untethered from corporeal, from physical objects. And it became a freestanding concept that could be used to address really a wide range of issues and problems. I'm just going to give you one practical example of that. So planning. So Hackney Council in London realized they had a problem, that a majority of planning applications from private citizens in relation to things like building an extension onto the back of their house, a majority of them failed. Over 60% of applications failed. So they brought in a service design agency called Snook, and they looked at the language that was used in the guidance, the questions that people had to answer, at the digital interface, at the coherence of the process. They worked out where the pain points were in that process, where the blockages were. They did a quick rough and ready prototype. They tested it with citizens, and then they built their system. And the result was a more successful rate of applications and a more user-friendly, a more human-centered planning process. So that's the sort of thing that we mean here. Design mindsets, really the key one is top center there. Okay, center your work around your users. There are lots of different elements to design thinking, but that's the absolute core of it. You need to know who you're working for and what their needs are, and make their goals and their objectives, as it says here, the lodestar, the key objective of your decision-making process. And then around that, you have an open-minded, curious, creative approach. You try and prototype things as roughly and quickly as possible. You get things out of your head into visual plans, sketches, etc. The key model that's used for design thinking comes from the Stanford Design School. I'll circle back to this a bit later because this is what we used in our educational project. What does any of this have to do with law? Well, design thinking started interacting with law probably around a decade ago. There's some earlier roots to it, but it really kicked off around about a decade ago. And there are two sources or well springs. So in Europe, it developed principally from the work of Helena Hapio and Stefano Passera in Finland. And their criticism of legal processes was around communication and information design. And they focused an awful lot on contracts, but also privacy notices, etc. So they've taken information design concepts to try to make legal documents and legal communications more effective. And here's just an example of that. Greater use of visualization and information design concepts within contracts. Okay. In the States, the focus, legal design really grew from the work of legal design labs in universities at Northwestern and Stanford and other places. And its focus was a little bit different. It was really on public legal education and access to justice issues. So they would use low-tech visual diagrams to help people, to help self-represented litigants navigate their way through court processes, or they would use simple tech like text message reminders to help people engage with court processes. An example here from a friend and colleague, Hallie J. Pope, who uses visual advocacy on legal problems In this case, it's the problem of voter suppression in certain states in America, and advising people of their constitutional rights in this visually engaging way. As a concept, it's been picked up by major law firms, in-house legal departments, at major companies, as we can see here. And indeed, much of the legal design work within the UK has been subsumed within this broader idea of legal innovation and legal tech. There was a big story in the Financial Times earlier this year, which does link to Hong Kong. So Fiona Phillips, who's the global head of digital legal at HSBC, had attended a legal design conference that I spoke at in Helsinki in 2019. And she flew straight back to Hong Kong and really thought we can do our legal services as a financial organization much better. We can make them much more human-centered. So she brought in the leading design agencies and legal design agencies, and they really reworked the bank's terms and conditions to make them more accessible to the business customers. Once you become aware of design thinking, it tends to color your approach to lots of different things. It's kind of it's a lens or a set of glasses that you use when you're looking at any kind of problem or challenge that arises in your life. So as an academic, I think conceptually about this phenomenon of legal design and interrogate it from multiple perspectives. So I did a paper here that looked at it from a sociological and anthropological perspective about legal and design cultures. As a constitutional lawyer, which is my main day job, I inevitably look at the constitutional implications of legal design, especially from a rule of law perspective, and on the responsibilities of the state to communicate legal rights and duties more effectively in line with the rule of law. And first and foremost, I see myself as an educator, as a law teacher, and therefore inevitably, I started thinking about what design thinking meant for me as an educator and what the implications were. I've done a paper on it here, but I want to talk to you today about a big project that we did in my previous law school, the University of Central Lancashire, Lancashire Law School. And this was a curriculum redesign. So there'd been a revalidation of our law degree. The structure of our first year had been set out as part of that revalidation process. And we had around about 12 months to work out how we wanted to deliver within this new structure. We approached it as a design challenge, and we saw that there were a number of wicked problems that we had to address. Wicked problems are those that are particularized, that are specific to your user group, where there's a non-definite evidence base, where we have to try to get it right first time. And it's just worthwhile pausing here and just thinking about the normal process that we as educators go through when we redesign a curriculum. And it will vary, but it will go something like this. So we will, as a team, discuss the structure that we're working within and a little bit about the goals of our program. We'll then go off individually and write our own parts of that curriculum. And then there'll be a light review by the coordinator. We'll also consult the students when we've drafted the whole thing, and we'll show them the whole thing and say, we'd appreciate your views on this. And by students, we don't, of course, mean all students, we just mean those students who volunteer for these roles. A very particular self-selected group of students who maybe aren't representative of the wider student experience. The sorts of goals that we wanted to pursue as part of this process was a more student-centered approach that promoted student engagement with the learning, with the classroom, that had a connected curriculum that worked as a program rather than different silos of module-specific approaches and information, that was inclusive in relation to race and gender, and that was an inclusive learning environment where students engaged with each other and engaged with their tutors in the classes. As we approach this as a design challenge, we followed this Stanford model of design thinking. I'll just briefly take you through it. So this is fluid. It's not a formal step-by-step process, but we found it useful as a way of giving some direction and structure to our project. And the first stage is to empathize, to really gather in a divergent range of information about your users, in this case our students, and their backgrounds and their needs and their experiences and their aspirations. Okay, so that's a divergent phase. And then you converge, then you define, and from that information, you focus it down to a series of problem statements or challenges. The third stage is to ideate, and again, this is convergent. You want to create as many ideas as possible with as few limits or restrictions as possible, because from that wide range of ideas, there will be some which are suitable here. So you take a creative process to generate lots and lots of ideas, which is divergent, and then you prototype, you select from them, and you try to make them kind of real and experienceable as quickly as possible. So again, that's a divergent phase. So this is sometimes called the double diamond. Diverge, converge, and then of course you apply it and test it. There are a range of different techniques that you can use at each stage, and that's what I'll illustrate as I go through talking through this project. So empathizing involves doing user-centered research. And to do that, you can do desk research, which is looking at the existing literature within the subject, which we did. We looked at higher education academy studies. We had done some previous studies within our own law school, in particular on the experience of our Black and ethnic minority students. But then we did user-centered interviews. So we didn't do these ourselves. We hired a third-year student to interview our first-year students. And we asked them the sorts of questions that we don't normally ask our students as part of this process. So they were questions like, what made you decide to do law as a university degree? Questions like, did you make any friends on the course in the first month or so? And then how many friends and how did you make them and how important are they as part of your studies? Question, what do your family feel about you being a law undergraduate and the connection between your life as a student and the whole rest of your life? We asked them questions about what they were most proud of. We asked them, what can you do now that you couldn't do at the start of the course? And we learned an awful lot. But what we were looking for really were the hooks that would enable us to promote engagement and feelings of pride and satisfaction about being a first-year law student in our law school. And blockages, those pain points, the points of their engagement with the program that were most difficult, so that we could think about them and address them. We created what are called user personas, and there are 3 examples here. And the point about user personas is to personify your user research. These aren't real people, but they're archetypes, and they embody the characteristics that are typical of students in our cohorts in relation to demographics like race and age, and education and background, and aspirations, and whether they work part-time or not, whether they have special needs. So we're able to embody a much wider range of students than we would normally have involved in this type of process. We kept these front and center, so we met weekly, but these 3 sheets of paper were always in the middle of the table. So when we were talking about our plans, we were always relating them to these people who became very real to us. They also act as boundary objects. And what that means is that when we would have a discussion and I'd go, our first year students, immediately in my mind, I've got a whole series of my experiences and my perceptions. And the other people in the project team will have, at that phrase, our first years, will have their own perspectives and their own images. And one of the values of user personas is that we we reduce the scope for misunderstanding and misinterpretation by getting things out of our head and into this more tangible form. We create good ideas by creating lots of ideas. So this is the define and ideation stage. But just a word about how we proceeded. We did a deep collaboration on this process. There were 6 of us in the project team, including the year 1 coordinator and the module leaders for the 4 first year modules: legal method, public law, criminal law, contract law. And we met weekly, and we tracked our we approached it as a proper project. So we had project goals. We tracked our progress on our goals through Gantt charts. And it was practically challenging, but ultimately it was a very creative and inspiring way to work. We created more and better ideas. And interestingly, the ideas that we created, we struggled to work out whose ideas they were, because they didn't come out from a person sending an email or coming to a meeting going, this is the way I think we should proceed. They emerged from our discourse in these meetings. So they were collaborative, and we thought that they were better. So how do you get lots and lots of ideas? Well, if you do that user-centered research, you will generate lots of ideas from there. It will really start your mind racing about what is really the lived experience of our students, and in reality, what are the parts of our program that make them excited? And that will generate ideas. And what are the practical issues that stop them engaging with the program? So in our case, it was very often practical things like public transport. A lot of our students used public transport to commute to our campus. A lot of our students were mature students or had caring responsibilities. We kind of knew that, we had a sense of it, but our user research really uncovered a lot of the practical implications of that. That gave us lots of ideas about how to structure the delivery of our program. Other techniques that we used, so we used brainwriting. So brainwriting is a variant of brainstorming that you're probably familiar with. Brainstorming, people shout out lots of ideas over like a 5-minute period, and you don't filter them, you don't evaluate them, you just get them down on a whiteboard or a sheet of paper. I think brainwriting is a development of that. It involves sitting in silence for any periods, could be 3, 4, 5 minutes, and writing down on post-it notes as many ideas as you can, 1 idea per post-it note. And sitting in silence is quite difficult for lawyers, and it's quite difficult for teachers. So for law teachers, it's a very, very difficult thing to do. But it means that you get ideas out there without dominant voices dominating the conversation, without people thinking this idea is ridiculous, so I'm not going to shout it out. You just screw it down on a piece of paper. It means that if you have 6 people in the room, you have 6 people generating ideas at the same time, rather than 1 person. So we thought it was a really, really effective way of working. And then this is a very typical service design scene, lots of post-it notes, and you get them up on the board and you prioritize them. And some of them you discard, some of them you cluster together under different things. So it's a bit like the user personas. You're making your ideas visible, making them tangible, you're getting them out of your head so that there can be a shared experience of them. Lots of other ways in which you can generate ideas. So you can use 5 whys. So why do we teach this way? Well, because, well, why is that? Because we take a student-centered approach. Why do we take a student-centered approach? So that the process of interrogation can allow you to explore things a lot more. You can do attribute listing. So listing the attributes of a challenge, which for education might be practical, it might be financial, it might be pedagogical, it might be technological, and other sorts of things. So we used, one time we used an analogy and association exercise. We said, what's a great example of a good service? from some aspect of your life outside of university. So it might be the way in which your corner shop treats you, or it might be the way in which a big company sets up its FAQs on its website. So we got all those ideas, things that make us feel good about using the service. And we thought, can we take some of those ideas and bring them into our educational offering here? Just as a simple example of one thing we did, we wanted to have program outcomes with connected learning across our programs, with a virtual spiral of skills development operating across modules, rather than 18 separate siloed modules that just happen to be together on the law program. So one of the ways in which we tried to achieve that was by coming up with a universal icon set. So these icons map onto our program level outcomes, and we encouraged colleagues, module leaders, and teachers on modules to use these just as little labels to drop into PowerPoint slides or seminar sheets or other learning materials, to make the connections between different modules more apparent. So just a very small idea, but it was generated by our discussions. Okay. Further stage is prototyping. Now we might ask you, how can you prototype in relation to a curriculum we've designed? For a website, you can do that. You can do a wireframe approach, just a very simple outline, and see how it all fits together. For a physical product, you would do a physical makeup of that product, make it out of cardboard or plastic or plasticine, and see how it works. But what we did for our curriculum was we produced just a very simple template like this. This was just a Word document. And we got the module leaders just to sketch in their anticipated content within that structure. So we had a weekly lecture and 2 workshops, and you can see a space between the workshops that we called a bridging session. We wanted students to work together informally, in groups, on very kind of low stakes tasks. So it wasn't group assessment, it was just simple tasks to work together over lunch, for example. And by doing this, we could sketch out what would happen over the course of a module and how that was coherent and how it fitted together. So I was the module leader for public law, and I could see if I do these things that I've sketched out on these weekly templates, then I can achieve what I want to achieve on this module. But much more importantly, we could compare across modules. So I could sit down with the module convener for legal method, and we could see week by week what our students were doing. And we could say, for example, in week 1 in public law, I'm getting students to use textbooks and use table of cases, indexes, table of statutes effectively, so they can navigate through the textbook. And my colleague could go, fantastic, I don't have to do that then, but I can just refer to your exercise. Similarly, on legal method, they will teach students how to find cases and how to read them. In the past, I would ask my students, I'd go, have you covered this yet? Or I would put in a task in week 3 of public law and hope that they had covered that on week 3, which is a terrible way of proceeding, really, but that's the way we'd always done it in the past. By sitting down and looking week by week what our student perspective of the program was, we could be far more coherent. So what my colleague had taught students about finding cases on Westlaw or Lexis, I could follow that in terms of timing. I could do a follow-on exercise in public law that allowed them to apply and develop those skills. I could use her materials and include them on my virtual learning environment. So we had consistent approaches and messages. And there are lots of other things you can do. You can do a desktop walkthrough, which we wanted to do, but we kind of ran out of time. On a desktop walkthrough, so let's say you have 12 weeks in your semester. You divide your tabletop into 12 sections. You get your 3 example students, and you physically walk them through week by week. And you all stand around the table and go, what's happening to our students in that week? What are they learning? What are their assessments? How do they fit together? And you get lots of people to stand around the table. You get your head of school, because you're going to ask them for some resources. You get your office staff, because they're a crucial part of the experience, and you see what the student perspective is of going through your law program on a week-by-week basis. And the big advantage, of course, of this is that it does shift perspective. Just eye on the time, and I will just finish up. On the testing phase, we used a method called Service Safari, but we could have used it on the research stage. The Service Safari is an informal applied ethnography, which makes it sound quite fancy. Practically what it involves is, as a teacher, you find a volunteer student and you follow them around all day. And I mean all day. You meet them at breakfast time where they live. And if they travel into campus, then you travel into campus with them. When they go into a class, you go into a class and sit with them and sit with the students and experience the class as though you were a student. If they go to the library, you go to the library. They have lunch with their friends, you go and have lunch with their friends. When they go home, you go home and you say, thanks very much, okay. And it seems like quite a simple thing, but it's an incredible learning experience. And just compare it with the idea of a teaching observation. You know, on a more formal classic teaching observation, you go and knock on your colleague's door, you walk down to the classroom together, you sit at the side, you observe your colleague teaching, and you look at the class, and then you might give them some feedback at the end of the teaching observation. It's completely teacher focused. The Service Safari is completely student focused, and you will gain perspectives, you will gain understanding and knowledge from your students who open up to you and speak to you over the course of the day, that are really, really valuable. Final reflections. This is a different way of co-working, and it was quite time consuming, but we felt it was incredibly valuable and inspiring. The key message for you today in the seminar: this is not an all or nothing methodology. We did it as an end-to-end design challenge. Other people have taken these tools and this design thinking very much on a pick and mix basis. So it's not an all or nothing methodology. You could use any single one of these techniques on an educational project. So it's hard graft to do and to implement. But we did it. So this curriculum ran in the academic year 1920, after I'd left that law school and moved to Lancaster. The initial signs were really promising. The outcomes at the end of the year were really good, but of course COVID hit around about halfway through that year. So evaluation of the impact of the curriculum was difficult, although the program team are returning to that. So over to you. What's your challenge or project? What's your initial thoughts about how you might use these design tools or these design methods to address them? And I've just summarized them here, and I'll just leave this up for a short while for you to think about how you might use these different sorts of things. And a final message: if any of this is of interest to you, you don't have to go and do a big course in it. You don't have to do a master's in design thinking. If any of this is of interest to you, there's 2 steps you can take, and you can start applying these tools next week or next month or this summer or next academic year to your educational practice. The first thing I would do would be to read Margaret Hagan's open access resource, Law by Design. It just explains the ethos, the ideas behind design thinking and how it applies to law. And then this toolkit. So this is Service Design Doing, an incredibly useful and accessible toolkit with all these methods in there that you can get hold of and start doing in your educational practice today, tomorrow, next week. Okay. And there's a little bibliography at the end. And I'll stop sharing. Thank you very much for your attention.